Fran Tankenton.
Fran Tankenton.
Fran Tankenton was the master quarterback of all.
I was going to run, scramble, do whatever I had to do.
He was the man who seeded the word scramble into pro football.
As a quarterback, my mission was to make my teammates better. In business, my mission is to help people.
I was not going to give up ever.
I like to make things happen. I am an entrepreneur.
And now, Fran Tankenton.
Welcome. This is the Fran Tankenton Show on Sirius XM Stars Channel 107. We're glad you joined us. We'll be here for the next 2 hours. And what we do every Monday night is bring you very, very smart people talking about subjects that are in the news. You can ask them questions. You'll learn a lot. And tonight, for instance, we've got Dr. Kevin Sabet, who's a former senior drug policy advisor for President Obama. And he's going to talk about the legalization of marijuana, and which, of course, as you know, has been legalized in Colorado and Washington State. Is that a good idea or bad idea? You'll be surprised at his comments coming forward, but you can call in and weigh in on this and have an opinion if you like. And our call number is 855-FRAN-107. That's 855-372-6107. Should marijuana be legal? Dr. Kevin Sabet, former senior drug policy advisor, thinks the move to legalize pot beyond medicinal use, as recently happened in Colorado and Washington, is bad policy. With former Congressman and recovering drug addict Patrick Kennedy, he founded Project SAM, which rejects the war on drug but opposes pot legalization. What are the smart, effective alternatives to the current laws and how best to implement them? This is a timely and vital national issue with long-term legal and social ramification. Dr. Sabet, thank you very much for joining us. Talk to me about your opinion on the legalization of marijuana in Washington and Colorado.
I'm happy to do that. Thanks again, Fran, for having me on. I'm honored. Well, essentially, I think that people are given a false dichotomy when talking about marijuana policy generally. People are given two choices. On the one hand, stick with current policies, which have been characterized as throwing people in jail and a war on drugs, et cetera. And on the other hand, the alternative to that, let's legalize, make a little money for government and for our communities, and undermine the cartels because we can legalize marijuana, and no one's ever heard of a cartel dealing with Budweiser. It might actually have some good. And Patrick Kennedy that you mentioned, and also a conservative commentator named David Frum, we've really put together a bipartisan coalition of folks coming together and saying, you know what, we may need to reform current policies. That probably makes sense. We shouldn't be sending people to jail for marijuana only. We shouldn't be using a lot of law enforcement resources, and we definitely need more prevention and treatment. But on the other hand, do we really want to legalize another addictive substance? We have alcohol and tobacco as our examples, and they're cheap as ever. They're easy to get. More kids use those drugs than marijuana combined as well. More people, 52% of people regularly drink. 27% of people regularly smoke tobacco cigarettes, 8% smoke marijuana. Do we want to make that marijuana number go up, especially given that today's marijuana is not your Woodstock weed? It's a completely different drug. And when you look at the science and our board of directors, which is a big group of public health professionals, we've come to the answer, no, let's not legalize because it's too risky of a choice given the possible consequences. Instead, let's get some smarter policies. Let's do more prevention, more treatment, there's much smarter enforcement, but let's not fall into the same trap we did, frankly, with our other two legal drugs.
Talk to me about marijuana addiction, alcohol addiction, both bad. And you can get as addicted to pot as you can to, I guess, alcohol?
You sure can. I mean, 1 in every 10 people who ever smoke marijuana in their life will become addicted. That's 10%. It's not 90%, but it's something to worry about. Even worse, though, if you start in adolescence, and this is what parents need to understand with the way the adolescent brain works. So the adolescent brain, before age 25, is not the brain when you're 40 or 50. And that brain, which is priming and becoming the person, the mature brain that it will eventually be and the life that it will define, that brain is altered by anything. It's altered by memories. Sure. It's altered by alcohol, it's altered by whatever, it's also altered by marijuana. And we're learning today that today's marijuana, which has so much more THC and is so much stronger than it used to be, affects adolescent brain in a very, very profound way. Things like learning and IQ, memory, judgment, these things are affected both short-term and long-term. So 1 in every 6 kids who start, not 1 in every 10, but 1 in every 6 will become addicted to marijuana if they start. And by addiction,
Wow.
I mean, they know they have a problem and they want to stop, but they can't.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, and that's a big enough problem for American parents to worry about.
And the addiction, I guess, is just as hard. Once you're addicted to that drug, I've got so many people in my life that are recovering alcoholics,
Right.
and they have a absolute horrific time. They'll stay off the booze for. I've had
Right.
friends stay off for as long as 10 or 12 years and go right back on and tell me it's just so hard to quit again.
It is. I mean, what we've learned about addiction is that it's chronic and relapsing. And so when you're in recovery, which is when you're not using, it's great. But it's easy to go back there because your brain remembers the pleasurable sensation it gets.
Yeah.
And so it is very hard to break. People can break it, though. We have millions of people today living in recovery, and they're testaments to how important it is that people go to treatment and stop. But at the same time, prevention is much better than treatment. So let's prevent future addictions. And we've seen with alcohol and tobacco how they're relentlessly advertised. I mean, look, you're just talking about the Super Bowl. Obviously, we talk about sports a lot on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not any coincidence that the beer ads, during games.
Yeah.
Are probably the best commercials on TV. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. Let me just reset this thing, Kevin. This is the Fran Tankenton Show on Sirius XM Stars Channel 107. We're glad you've joined us. You're listening to Dr. Kevin Sabet, who's former Obama senior drug policy advisor. If you'd like to weigh in, give your opinion of the legalization of pot, he called this number 855-FRAN-107, 855-372-6107. And we have a caller, Kevin, McDaddy from Maryland. I guess you're a Ravens fan, but McDaddy, talk to me.
I think they should legalize it.
You think they should legalize it, and why do you think they should legalize it?
Because they would get our economy wouldn't be so shitty. They would get us out of everything.
I'd love to comment to that.
Yeah, you can. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, if only that were true. Let's look at alcohol and tobacco. We've legalized those, and they're both addictive substances, and they're both used by way more people than marijuana. You would think with that logic that our economy would be doing great, and we'd be getting a lot of tax revenue. The bottom line is we're not. For every dollar in tax revenue from alcohol or tobacco, do you know how much we have to spend in social costs? $10. So it's a horrible investment. That's not the right kind of investment. Instead, let's invest in stopping use before it ever starts, and that's much better for our economy than the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be lost because of treatment, because of lost productivity, because of accidents. The British Medical Journal just came out with the most comprehensive study on driving and marijuana, and they said today's marijuana causes your car crash risk to double when you're under the influence of the drug, versus when you're not under the influence, when you're not using. That costs money. It costs society money, healthcare costs, accidents. So you know what? It sounds great, like we'd be able to make a lot of money, and a lot of people think that, and I could see why that's appealing. But the bottom line is we lose money when more people use marijuana, not gain.
Kevin, do you see more states legalizing it, or do you think that the experiment in Colorado and Washington will go amok and they'll rescind that? What is your thought?
It's going to be really interesting. There's no doubt that there's a very well-financed movement to legalize marijuana in this country, and they've frankly cut their long hair and traded in their hemp shirts for Armani suits, and they're doing very well. So I got to hand it to them. They're running very good campaigns by getting people to believe what we just heard the caller say, that it's going to be a revenue generator. The other argument is we're not going to have cartels anymore. We're going to lower violence. All these arguments that don't hold up to any evidence. they've been able to successfully present. So you know what, Fran, I don't know if the experiments run amok, like you said, in these two states, or the federal government comes in and does something, it could backfire. I mean, we could actually, you're right, we could have this not happen. Time will tell.
So in Washington and Colorado, I guess their state government voted and made it legal, right? I mean, was it?
Well, what happened was people voted for it. So in the last
they had a referendum.
Right, they had a referendum, and so they had about in Colorado, several millions of dollars were spent on the yes side, and not that, I think a few $100,000 on the no side. In Washington, there was nothing spent on the no side, and about $3 million on the yes side. So,
and the $3 million were coming from any organized group, or just the marijuana smokers?
There's a group called There's a couple of organized groups: Marijuana Policy Project, George Soros, and the Open Society Institute, because
George is supportive, huh?
Oh yeah, he's been a big financier of legalization ever since the late '80s, actually.
Oh, good old
and
George!
The legalization of all drugs, by the way, not just marijuana.
Okay, we're going to take you. We got more calls waiting on us. This is the Fran Tankenton Show on Sirius XM Stars Channel 107. You're listening to Dr. Kevin Sabet, former Obama senior drug policy advisor, talking about the legalization of marijuana in both Colorado and Massachusetts. We have Alex from Indiana. Alex, weigh in here, son.
Hey, how are y'all doing tonight? Well,
we're doing fine.
Just like to say that personally, I feel that marijuana is not an addictive drug. I started when I was close to 10 or 11, and I've quit and had to stay quit because of my job, current situation. And quite honestly, if they legalized marijuana, I think everybody would be in a lot better position financially. And honestly, we wouldn't have as much violence out there, because most of our violence stems from marijuana sales and stuff like that. And the gang violence would actually go down because there's not worried about who's selling what's selling that.
All right, Alex, we thank you for your opinion. Kevin, talk to us about Alex says it's not addictive. What say you?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. I mean, first of all, it's great to have an opinion about addiction, but you can't really have an opinion on the science. And so the science is very clear when looking at, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people who have used marijuana and other drugs, and the controlled, very careful studies that have been done about addiction. So I'm very happy that he stopped after using when he was so young, at age 10 or 11. That's good for him, and he was part of the majority of people who are not addicted to marijuana once they start it. But again, for a minority of those folks, they do get addicted, and that minority can cause a great problem. The other thing that the caller said was about the violence issue. And if only that were true. First of all, marijuana markets are not actually really violent. I mean, frankly, most people get marijuana from a friend or relative. It's not a transaction that, sort of when you think about a drug deal like in the 80s with crack, or when you think about heroin. I mean, it's usually not like that. So
cocaine is more problematic.
So, right, exactly. So, and the other thing is, there's been some exhaustive studies done showing that cartels only get probably 15 to 20% of their revenue. These are the Mexican cartels, from marijuana. Well, frankly, we grow better marijuana in the U.S. People grow it, they sell it, they give it away. It's not really a violent market, so it's not going to do much for violence. Frankly, if you want to get rid of the Mexican drug cartels, you have to focus on the other expensive drugs like cocaine or heroin or meth to some extent, and B, you have to focus on the other things these people are doing. I mean, these cartels are involved in human trafficking, first and foremost. They're involved in piracy. They're involved in, frankly, Al-Qaeda was just cited yesterday in a news story as being involved with the billion-dollar underground tobacco industry. So just because you legalize it doesn't mean you're not going to have shady characters dealing with it.
Has the usage of marijuana risen over the years, or is it stagnant, or what?
It actually has gone up recently. So it's sort of starting about 2007, when a lot of these medical marijuana dispensaries were in Colorado and California and all around the country, and people started accepting medical marijuana, you have seen a steady rise in youth use and overall use of marijuana. But I will tell you, since the 70s, the heyday of pot, since the mid to late 70s, there's been a major reduction in marijuana use overall. So if you look at the long view, there's actually been a reduction.
All right. We have Teresa from California. Teresa, do you want to ask Dr. Sabet a question or make a statement? Either one. Glad to have you.
I actually was just listening, and I I heard you mention that if we legalized it, we wouldn't make as much money. Our economy wouldn't do as well. But I'm just curious because of all the millions and millions of dollars we spend on drug-related charges in housing prisoners and people in jail for marijuana charges.
That's a good question. That's a great question, and you would be right, caller, if we did actually house and jail people whose only crime was smoking marijuana. But that's not the case. I mean, you talk to a cop, they'll laugh at you when you say, you focus your resources on people with one joint in their pocket or walking down the street, or do you bust down doors when you think somebody's smoking pot in their mom's basement? It doesn't happen. People are not rotting in or even spending any time in our prisons for small amounts of marijuana. Now, there are people that are arrested along with other crimes, or are arrested. Let's say they're in a public space and they're smoking a joint in New York or somewhere, and they are arrested, and they're usually, if they're not detained for 12 to 24 hours, they're released and they have to come back and see a judge and pay a fine. That happens, and so we can talk about what happens with that. But people are not in our jails or prisons because of smoking pot, so that wouldn't happen.
Thank you, Teresa. We appreciate your call. Another question, Kevin. Talk to me about the synthetic forms of the drug that are out there.
Well, there are a lot of synthetic forms, and they can be deadly and especially worrisome. And these are things that basically people in these sort of with a good understanding of chemistry have been able to alter marijuana and change it so that it has a different chemical composition than what we would normally think of as marijuana, and many of them have very different effects, hallucinogenic effects. Some of them are synthetic marijuana, others are synthetics of other kinds of drugs, like when you hear about bath salts. That's not the marijuana. That's a synthetic cathinone, is what we call that. And those things are sold oftentimes in a gas station or a Quickie Mart or something, and it just says not for human consumption. And that's how they get around the law. And unfortunately, they've evaded the law by doing that. And now states are finally, after dealing with deaths and emergency room admissions and all these kinds of things, a lot of states are waking up and figuring out how to deal with these. But it's been a cat and mouse game. It's been very, very, very difficult to deal with those drugs, but they can be deadly.
You're listening to the Fran Tankenton Show on Sirius XM Stars Channel 107, and also listening to Dr. Kevin Sabet, former Obama senior drug policy advisor, talking about the legalization of marijuana, which has been legalized in the states of Colorado and Washington. We'd love to have you join this conversation. The call number is 855-FRAN-107, 855-372-6107. John from Ohio, welcome to the show.
Hey, I was curious as to what scientific studies the doctor is referencing. And I'm not arguing that the chemical compounds in the marijuana today are not addictive, but I'm suspicious that the people in these studies that are quote-unquote addicted to their marijuana have other addictions. I just think that the marijuana may have gotten there first. I mean, they could be addicted to cheeseburgers. They could be addicted to masturbating. Where's the line drawn with specifically marijuana?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. You can be addicted to all those things, and the question is, what are the effects of that addiction, and what are the societal effects of it is kind of for policy. But the studies are actually if you actually go to our website, this is the time where I get to plug Sam. If you go to learnaboutsam.org, learnaboutsam.org, we have a plethora of studies on there. We just launched a few weeks ago, so we're still updating them. The National Institutes of Health has also sponsored a lot of these studies that look at the addictiveness of marijuana. It's really scientific fact. It's been looked at over and over again about how to define addiction. This is done by the American Psychiatric Association. It's done by major legitimate organizations who have really looked at addiction and decided what the definitions are and what that means. But we can throw around these words. Again, the question is, what are the effects of it? And for a lot of kids, it can have major effects in terms of learning, memory, attention, and for adults also motor skills, driving. And this could, this translates into costs for society, whether it's cost to your employer for being absent, whether it's cost to society because of health insurance and hospital admissions. There are 400,000 hospital admissions every year, ER admissions, because of a marijuana acute episode. That usually means like a psychotic episode that somebody might have had. Now, that isn't a majority of the time that people use marijuana, and I'm not saying that, so we have to be careful not to be overblown in what we're saying. But again, it's enough to cause us some problems.
Tell me a little more. I know that you've Patrick Kennedy, and he's the son of which one of the Kennedys?
He's son of Ted Kennedy, the Lion of the
Ted Kennedy. He's a recovering drug addict.
Right.
And he's joined you and partnering with you with this Project Sam that rejects this war on drugs, right?
It rejects both dichotomies. It rejects a war. We don't want to lock people up in prison for using pot, so I agree with the earlier caller. But we also don't want to legalize because we learned the painful experience of alcohol and tobacco. And basically, Fran, what happened was when these things were legalized in Washington and Colorado, he called me and said, because we had worked together when I was at the White House on other issues, and he said, I'm really concerned because this threatens my recovery and other people's recovery. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, we're going to be normalizing this. It's going to be in our face. It's not good for people who have these addictions, and it's not good for kids. And I've looked at the science and been kosher to all of the science that's gone on. And we need to change the conversation. The conversation has been about, does weed come from the devil or does it come from God? And so which way are you going to go? And rather than that kind of loaded language and rhetoric, we said, let's stick to the science. And we talked to public health experts from around the country, and they agreed. And so they came on board, and that's why this is starting. I think people are realizing we've made all these mistakes before with other addictive drugs. Let's not do it again.
Yeah, good for you. All right, we've just got a few more minutes for this segment, but Kevin, we got a couple more callers that I want to get in. Laura from Colorado. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to say I was married to a guy who smoked pot, and I didn't think it was a big deal, but it is a big deal because it's just like any other addiction. It's whether it's alcohol or anything else. I mean, he had to get high every half an hour, and it was not good. So.
Well, thanks for the call, Laura. Thanks very much. Christina in Nebraska?
Hi, I just wanted to know, I think a lot of times I'm in the mental health profession, and what is forgotten is that starting with marijuana, smoking pot at an early age, such as 10 or 11, is actually a mask for, mental health issues such as maybe some schizophrenia or bipolar. So if you want to elaborate a little bit on that, I think that would be fabulous.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up. We would be really amiss if we didn't bring up the mental health connection. I mean, people know Patrick Kennedy's cause has been mental health and making sure that Americans with mental health problems get the same kind of insurance coverage as those with physical health problems. And so, people say, well, why are you interested in the marijuana issue now if you're about mental health? And what he says, which is true, is that there's a huge link there. And so, and by the way, the link does go both ways. And so the scientists are still trying to dissect that, but we know people, and especially kids, who start using marijuana early, they have a much greater chance of triggering psychosis and schizophrenia, and to a lesser extent, depression. So oftentimes, as the caller said, it also is masking that, and so it's a way of people coping. But on the other hand, it also precipitates that. So scientists are actually seeing how it goes both ways. And if we care about mental health, which has been the cause, Patrick's devoted his entire life to, then we can't just put aside the marijuana discussion and sweep it under the rug. We have to deal with it in a science-based way. So I'm really glad the caller brought that up.
Christina, thanks for your call. We got great calls tonight. Sarah, we're going to get you in here. You're here in Georgia. Welcome to our show, Sarah, and ask Dr. Sabet any question you like.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you're talking about science, because the one thing that I always tell my daughter and her friends when we're talking about drug use, it's been proven that smoking marijuana will permanently change your EEG, which is your brain waves.
Right.
And it affects the frontal lobe. And even after you stop smoking, they don't go back to normal. And I think people need to know that it can permanently change your brain forever. So the longer you smoke, the more it's changed. It also can affect thyroid function and also how your brain functions as far as vascularity. You won't get as much blood to the frontal lobe. And I think people forget to think about it. It might be a natural compound, but it doesn't mean that it affects our body naturally.
Yeah, no, those are some great points. And again, this is why we need to get the science out there, and we don't want to overstate it, but we also don't want to understate it, because kids, they look at cocaine and heroin or pills, for example, and they may you can have a heart attack immediately, or you have a quick an overdose and just die. And so there's this immediate effect. With marijuana, you don't have that. You usually don't have, unless you have one of the people with a psychotic episode, you don't have that immediate effect. So a lot of kids just think, well, what's the big deal? My friends are doing it. They're getting decent grades. They seem like good, cool guys. Why don't I do it? And what we need to see is this can have long-term damages, and so kids do need to learn that. So I think that was a great comment. Great callers.
Great callers. Kevin, you have been off the charts great. You've made us smarter. This has been a great discussion. We thank all of you callers for joining in the discussion. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this message.
This is Fran Tankenton.
I've always believed in the power, in the inspiration, and the intellect, and the work ethic of the American people.
We'll be right back.